Welcome to the NRT Now podcast, giving you the latest in Christian music news, topics, and artist interviews directly from the largest Christian music site online, newreleasetoday.com. Now, here's your host, Jake.
Hey, welcome back to part 2 of The Beginning. We're so glad that you're here, that you're helping us launch this new podcast here. It's something that we're all very, very excited about. We're very excited for where this is going to go here and what we're going to be able to bring to you. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a trip back to the cruise, which served as the venue for Kevin and my, or is it Kevin and I's? I'm not sure what the proper grammar is there, but it served as a venue for our conversation. And now that I've had a little bit of time to reflect on the cruise, the more I come to think that it wasn't just a repeat. It wasn't just something that was put on loop for cash grab or publicity stunt or just to keep dcTalk back in the forefront of our minds here. I think it was something very special. This one was different. It took a little bit longer to fill up. It was met with some more criticism based on scheduling. It was too early. We're not out of school yet. Along with the other criticism that it wasn't a land-based tour, that it was inaccessible both financially and, physically here. And the only itinerary difference between the two cruises was the private island that the cruise line took us to. The lineup seemed like it took a little bit longer to fill up. There's always some sort of publicity, promotion, I should say, to get cabins sold, cornhole, dinner with Michael Tate, karaoke. It just seemed like everything ran a little bit slower, and it almost came, at least from my opinion, it came with kind of a meh kind of reception. It's even to the point where I legitimately called Premier and asked what happened if the cruise didn't sell out. But once we got to Port Canaveral, and once we started getting in and ready for the cruise, that all kind of faded away. The weather around Orlando there just wreaked havoc on flights in and out. And unfortunately, some people didn't even make the boat. That's how bad the flights were delayed and canceled and moved around. Personally, we were worried about some friends of ours who their flight got canceled. They actually came in the morning of the cruise with very little margin for error. I think they were in at 1 p.m. and the door shut at 3:30, somewhere around there. I know this is corny, but the conference I attended the week before the cruise, former Navy Blue Angel, now turned motivational speaker, named John Foley came to speak, and his tagline is, "Glad to be here." Hashtag little R with the circle trademark.com. You get the picture. That's the phrase that comes to mind thinking about actually getting on the boat. I guess that means his talk worked, right? I remembered it. So I guess what I'm getting at is the atmosphere on the boat was a little bit different this time around. People were reunited with friends that they made on the last cruise, ourselves included. But overall, it was more relaxed. There's still a very major excitement in the air, probably aided by the fact that a lot of us got our pictures taken with the band on our way on board. But what I think was missing was the anticipation and the expectations that a 17-year intermission brought to the table. The break was broken. We've seen it before. Now we're just here and we get to enjoy it. It came across through their set as well. They all seemed so much more relaxed, and the show was more natural. They opened up, even more about the causes for the intermission, some life behind the scenes, when they were big, and just they showed themselves a lot more this time around than just, hey, is this going to work? What are we doing? Do people still like us? Do they expect the world from us? It was just overall, I don't know, it felt more natural. Just even for all of us on board. So what I also noticed was how important this was to the industry as well. I noticed quite a few artists who were on the boat. They weren't there to perform. They weren't part of the lineup, but they were just there to enjoy the experience. We saw artists like Coffee from Grits, Adam Agee, he was from Stella Cart, took over Audio A. He now has his own stuff going, which is pretty awesome. We saw Manic Drive on the boat as well. It just really goes to show how important this band is in the industry as a whole and what influence they've had in the industry as a whole, not only at the time they were going, but also now as well. So just a funny story. It was 80s night on the boat the last night. I had a little bit of trick up my sleeve. Even Kevin had to roll his eyes. It was being 80s night. I chose to go as a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. It was amazing. I've never done anything like that before. Usually I like to try and stay in the shadows, but for whatever reason, I just made a spectacle of myself. Absolutely had a blast. So the Raptors game was on. Raptors and the Golden State Warriors, last game of the finals. Everybody was around the TV watching it, and so right down where 80s night was happening in the promenade, ran into the guys from Manic Drive. I've done an interview with Manic Drive a while ago, started becoming friends with the guys there. So my wife and my kid is like, hey, you should go talk to them. So I went over, gave Michael the fist bump, said, hey, kind of how's it going? And he's looking at me like, okay, what's going on? This is weird, but I got to be polite and all that. So I took the hood off and we all had a blast. Adam AG was down in front, Sean from Manic Drive, he was laughing. So, we had a good time with that there. So, overall the cruise just had a lot of fun, had a lot of fun elements to it. We personally had a blast, and like I said, dcTalk coming back together and being more natural, it seemed like it fit a lot more this time around. So now that we're on the other side of the cruise, they've had their last show on the boat, they're back in a rhythm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's been asking, what's next? Everybody's thinking, what's next? Are they getting back together? Are we going to see them on terra firma here? Kevin Max, before the cruise started, had hinted that there was more to this reunion than just riding on boats. And for those of us that were there, it just felt right. So, it weighs on us more and more. The intermission is lifted. Is there another act, or are we at the curtain call here? So, not long after, in an interview, Tate set the Christian music world ablaze with a comment that something is definitely coming in 2020. A few dates, maybe something spread out over a few years. Not long after that, Toby responded, either he's being the realist or raining on the parade. However you want to put it. I say being the realist, but he said that there's nothing solid or definitive yet. It's just something that they're talking about and trying to get going. And then in our interview with Kevin Max, K-Max flat said that there was more music to be made with dcTalk. The details aren't quite set yet. And K-Max confirmed the change in the atmosphere that we all felt, and the question of should we do it was answered with a resounding, I'm kidding. It was met with a resounding, absolutely, it's got to happen. So there's a lot of swirling and a lot of rumor, but there's nothing definitive yet. Our friends over at Rock on Purpose posted an article posing the question, what would a potential dcTalk reunion mean for Christian rock? We've heard a lot about the subject from many different places, so they shifted the question to make it personal for their contributors. I think the sentiment is very clear. It would be an absolutely amazing thing. dcTalk had such an impact on people, and not just people, but the industry as a whole. It would make waves through the industry in different ways. So, like I said in the last episode, each one of these episodes will have an accompanying post along with it, where we'll send you directly to where these articles are. So, be sure to go look at that and follow on to the article over at Rock on Purpose there. So to carry on with their question, a reunion would be amazing on a personal level. dcTalk was the first band that I connected with personally. When I first got my boombox when I was 12, 13, somewhere in that neighborhood, it came with an SC Squared album, which, for dcTalk fans stands for Stephen Curtis Chapman. I'm pretty sure it was dcTalk that coined that. But the album was Heaven in the Real World, if I remember right. Signs of Life may have been my second album. It might have been Jesus Freak. I don't remember what order all that came in. But, Jesus Freak was right at the beginning there. People would ask me what my favorite band was. I would always say, dcTalk, and half the time get met with, did you just say ZZ Top? Like, I was too young for a classic rock band to be that big of a fan, but it's like, no. dcTalk. So, just like every church kid at the time, I learned the Jesus Freak rap, and, I thought I was cool for it. I probably wasn't, but I thought it was it. That's what matters, right? Just like, in the biblical time, in the New Testament times, they drew the ichthus fish to recognize the Christians without, alerting the Romans, the authorities. I think learning the Jesus Freak rap is the 90s youth group equivalent to the ichthus fish. Like, if you can quote the Jesus Freak rhyme, you knew that you were saved in a youth group. But I mean, it really united us. From an industry standpoint, I would think I think it would, I hope it would create waves that would cause the industry to shift. That's my hope. Radio to me is in a rut right now. There's a specific formula you have to follow to get on the major radio stations. The radio stations that have variety or are a specific genre like rock or hip hop or whatnot, they're small and underfunded. There's just not a whole lot on the national stage outside of the specific formula here. So the music that is out in the limelight, it has a mold. It has to be cast in this specific mold. There's a little room for variance, but not much in my opinion. But the beauty of dcTalk is that they don't follow pattern. They blaze their own path, and the industry shifts around them. What I would hope is it would spark a creative surge in the industry and bring that creative wave with it, and bring that to radio and back out to the limelight. As for touring, my guess, and this is completely a guess, somewhat educated guess, and I may be giving myself too much credit there, but I would think that they would have 3 to 4 year dates a year in kind of the more major markets that are easy to get to. I think it would have to be in a large arena, basing off of what the Newsboys or Toby Mac brings through the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex here. They fill one of the larger concert venues for 2 days straight, and both shows are either sold out or very close to. So I would think dcTalk concert would do that and more. So that's my take on dcTalk and the Jesus Freak Cruise. There's a lot of awesome stuff there. There's still a lot of stuff up in the air. Nobody knows what's coming next, and I don't think even they do yet. So I just can't wait to see what's coming next. Let's shift over to what I think is going to be my favorite part of the podcast, and that's the conversation with artists. I should really get a creative name for this part of the show, but we'll get to that later. So my first guest here, our first artist guest, he released his first album this past September, just about a year ago. The album Wide Open was very well received. It earned him 3 nominations for our NRT We Love Christian Music Awards. And just recently, he released the single Why God to radio. And I think that puts him up at 3 radio singles, 4 if you count his Born Again collaboration with Zonti, which to me is very impressive for a debut album. And so if you haven't guessed already, or if you got ahead of me and read the description and saw what was happening here, our first guest is Austin French. And I asked Austin to be our first guest, not only because I'm a huge fan of his music and also his message, but also because, this is the beginning of the podcast. Well, yeah, I mean, we covered that extensively. Too much, maybe. But what that means for me is, and when August rolled around last year, I'd only been at NRT for just a short time, I think a couple of months. And as I was getting ready to go up to a festival in Wyoming, I took a leap of faith and just asked about doing interviews while I was there. I was just doing articles, album reviews, just kind of more behind the scenes a little bit. And so it was a little bit of a leap of faith to come out and start talking with artists and start doing interviews and stuff. So Austin was one of the artists that we requested an interview from. I loved his song Freedom Hymn. Just knew that something good was going to happen there. So he was one of the artists that we asked to do an interview with. And he and Manifest were my first 2 interviews there at the show there. So I learned a lot that weekend. It's helped shape my journey here into starting this podcast and to the interviews that I've done over the past year or so that hopefully you guys have been able to read and get some of the stories from the artists. So it helped me just really realize that there's more than just what happens on stage or through the headphones or your car stereo, but there's good stories and the life that happens behind the songs, behind the music. That's really what gives the music purpose and gives, the music more power. So in starting this podcast, I can't think of anyone better to be here at the beginning. Austin was there at the beginning when I started doing interviews and started that journey. So I think it's just appropriate that he's our first guest and first artist guest and helping launch the podcast here, being here at the beginning of this podcast. So here we go. Here's Austin French. All right, so Austin, thank you so much for joining us here this is actually episode 2 of our brand new podcast.
Man, I'm excited to be on here. Thanks for having me on.
So I was just saying how, it's awesome that you're here to help us launch the podcast because I don't know, I'm sure you remember last year, it was August or so, we had the chance to sit down and chat for a little bit.
Yeah.
That was my first interview. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Manifest was my first interview the night before, but you were my first second interview that night.
I love it. Well, you did pretty great. So now you're starting a podcast, huh?
Absolutely. And I couldn't think of anybody else better to help us launch the podcast since you were at the beginning of my time starting interviews to help us start this podcast here.
Well, man, I'm honored. It's going to be great.
So, and one of the things that I think is just absolutely awesome, that interview helped shape where I've gone here. I think you and I remember that interview a little bit differently, trying to, figure out how to do the interviews. I know that was probably the most awkward interview that I had. Sitting there trying to type out all the answers instead of just recording.
Right. Oh, yeah. Now, every now and then you get it both ways. But the general thing about that interview that I remember was that it was great questions, and you're a great guy, so it definitely wasn't awkward. I love people, and I love talking to people, so people could be literally writing notes as I'm talking with a notepad in front of me, and I'm okay. And as long as I'm talking to an actual person, like it feels personable and I just love people, so I don't mind however the interview goes. It's never really awkward to me as long as I get to kind of hang out with somebody while I'm doing it.
Yep. So that really shaped, kind of where I went, not only just like, hey, dummy, just record the conversation, but, just also hearing the stories, just hearing where you've come from, like that kind of shifted what I was thinking for interviews and not just talking about the music and just what Austin is on stage, but more of who you are, the person behind the music and what the music shows of the artist, not just, it's a cool song that, I'm jumping up and down to.
Absolutely, man.
So, that interview was just before the album came out last year. I think it was about a month beforehand.
Yeah.
So a lot of that music that you did in that set was fairly new to everybody. One of the cool things that I remember from that one was the first time that you did a guest appearance for Mandisa on Bleed the Same.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the interview right before then, I mean, I could just tell the giddiness right before you were able to go on. Yeah. That happened just again here not too long ago.
It did, yeah. We played in the Texas Motor Speedway together, and sure enough, she hit me up on Instagram and asked me if I would come out and do that again. And you'd never turn down Mandisa, and when she asked you to duet with her on stage. And again, I was just as giddy as I was probably then, and I'm just super honored to share the stage with such a legend, And yeah, so you got to see the first one of those. I think I was still just as nervous and just as excited in Texas recently too.
Well, I've gotten to see, that's been only 2 times, right?
Yeah.
So I've been there for both of the exclusive Austin French Mandisa performances.
There's something about it, man. Something about it.
So, and there was storms both days, both times. Last year we had the huge windstorm and the rainstorm right before Mandisa's set.
Right.
This year was the lightning storm.
Yeah, right before her set.
So, I mean, I'm starting to think it's me, man. Like, I've been there for both performances. There were both storms before both times.
But listen, the concert still happens either way. So you just make it more exciting is what it is.
I'll run with that. I'm good with that. And so what all's happened with you in the last year? You released the album in September. You've gotten 3 We Love Christian Music nominations. What else has been going on with you in the last year since you've released that album?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's kind of been a whirlwind of things. I released another single to radio and called "Born Again." After that set, and really after that season, I think it went to radio in September. I think that year, and so I kind of watched it do its thing, and it's just interesting to watch, especially when you finally release music. How people take these songs that you wrote in the small little room in Nashville and they make it their own. And not the fact that they're singing it, but the fact that they're believing it or holding on to it, or lyrics in the verses that they feel like are just describing their life. And I had no idea. And so, that part has really blown me away. So that's been a big deal. It's just watching people really grab a hold of the music that I had written. And so that's been a big difference this last year of just watching that. I got to tour with some of my all-time favorite people in the world, Casting Crowns, and that was just an unreal experience, just insane. So that happened this last time. Got to do an arena tour with them. First time I've ever really played in arenas, and got to just see these guys, and Mark Hall and Casting Crowns and those guys, and Zach Williams as well. Just watch how they do ministry, learn so much from those guys. And through that process, we actually found out that we're expecting another baby. So a lot going on, a lot of music, a lot of ministry, and my family's just growing rapidly. So a lot's happened.
And not to sound too stalkerish, but I got to see that last show in College Station on that Only Jesus tour.
Yeah.
And just to see that, that whole tour and just how you let off the night was awesome. And
thanks, man.
I believe that that night was where you also came out to be Zonti's hype man.
I did. That was the last night of tour, and Zonti is a hip-hop guy. And, what's a hip-hop guy without his hype guys,
Absolutely.
So we put on some hoodies. He had no idea we were coming on stage. And we just started dancing. And I can't dance if you've ever seen me dance. That is something that you probably would want to forget. But yeah, we just went out there and gave it our all. And it was so much fun. He loved it. He felt right at home, I think, with some hype guys throwing up towels and just going crazy. So it was fun.
Well, unfortunately, that's not something that we get to forget because there is video evidence of this.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's saved on my phone. I'll keep that tucked away.
Perfect.
So you mentioned that you guys are expecting another one.
We are, man. Yeah, we're expecting. We have 2 little boys, and so our little guys just turned 4 and 2, and then in December we're having a little girl, and my world is changing.
So we talked a little bit about this when I caught you at Celebrate Freedom, but you and I are both pregnant buddies in this. I think our due dates are 5 days apart.
Yeah, not far, man. And you guys are having a girl too?
We actually are not finding out. So you guys just did your gender reveal. You guys are
Yeah.
having a little girl. I'm sure Jocelyn is like over the moon about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Like finally a girl out of the sea of boys.
Oh yeah, she is excited. I think with us, she couldn't prepare to have another boy. In a way, she was like, I gotta know if I'm gonna be in this alone or not. So she is over the moon that we're having a baby girl. So much so that she's already buying little girl outfits all the time, and we're a good distance from December 29th, you know. And I feel like the first year of this kid's life is already taken care of.
And I'm excited for you. Like I said, I have no idea what it is to have little boys, but there's just something special about being the daddy of a little girl. So I am very excited for you to be able to experience that.
Thanks, Dan. I'm over the moon about it.
So when I got to see that first concert of yours back in August of last year, well, I should say my first concert of yours, you expanded a little bit on your story and kind of where you've come from. You grew up in the church. You know, your mother was a music teacher, I believe.
Yeah, right there in our house growing up.
And so you had a period of time there, you know, with your father and just the church in general that really kind of, I'll say, shook you a little bit in your faith and all that.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about that story for those of us who haven't, you know, either been to an Austin concert yet or
Totally.
read your website?
Yeah, man, I grew up in the church. So my dad was a worship pastor and my mom was a music teacher, and we'd go to church on Sundays and sit on the front row and pretend that our life was perfect. And when I was 8 years old, I went to my room one day and got a journal out and wrote the words, "I would never be a Christian," in that journal. And I didn't want to be a Christian as a little kid. I was surrounded by it, or I was surrounded by people that said they were Christians. And then on Sundays, we would pretend that everything was perfect. But at home, my dad was abusive and things were falling apart. And we were taught that we couldn't show that at church, or that Jesus didn't want that at church. And we had to pretend for everybody else that our life was just so perfect. And I just didn't want to be that. And people would tell me my dad was the godliest man they'd ever met. But I couldn't understand why a godly man would beat his wife and kids like that. And I didn't want to be a godly man. And that's what following Jesus was about. As an 8-year-old little boy, I decided I didn't want anything to do with it. And it wasn't really until later on. My parents got divorced when I was 8. And this is kind of the stigma of the church for me at this moment. Was the pastor of our church came and set us down and told us to never come back to our church again.
Oh, geez.
That it was embarrassing, and that my dad was on staff, and it showed that we were falling apart. And so kind of got kicked out of that church, and I felt like a black sheep, like I wasn't wanted because I was messed up. And so I didn't think the church was a place for messed up people like me. And it wasn't until 8th grade that a guy got on stage at this music camp that I went to, and he basically just wrote it out. He said, "Don't judge Jesus on the broken people he came to save, because broken people hurt broken people, but Jesus wants broken people. He heals them, and that's who he came to die for. Broken people that said, I'm sick and I need a doctor." And we all have to come to that point. And at that point in my life, I realized I judged Jesus on everyone around me, but I'd never met him. And so that night I met actually who Jesus was and realized what he came to do and what he did for me. And he wasn't ashamed of my scars and my bruises and all the dysfunction that I grew up in, that he came to redeem every bit of it. And and so that's really where the turn happened for me, was in 8th grade at a summer camp, music camp. And I accepted Jesus there. So it took a while, from 8 years old to 8th grade to really understand and what the church was. And it was a place full of sick people who needed a doctor, that are going to hurt people every now and then. But we're not supposed to be looking at each other. We're supposed to be looking at Jesus, the perfecter of our faith, the one who leads every one of us every day. So yeah, I fell in love with the church after that, and it's a big reason that I became a Christian artist, was to write music for broken people just like me.
And in the years since, you have reconciled with your dad, right?
Yeah, man. When I was actually 18, and there's a lot of eights in my story. Uh, when I was 18, I went on a road trip with my dad. I kind of forced myself in a car with him for about 10 hours on a road trip. And ever since I got saved, I realized I was definitely supposed to be um, definitely supposed to be reconciling with my dad. I knew that was something that I had to do. I didn't deserve God's forgiveness, but He gave me something I didn't deserve, and I'm supposed to give that to other people as well, and that includes my dad. And so I started working towards forgiving my dad, and we went on this trip together. And when I was 18, he finally asked for my forgiveness, and it changed my life. And we became friends, became close friends, and I would even go as far as saying he's one of my best friends today. But yeah, so it was a really sweet moment, and God has reconciled my relationship with my dad completely. And I've learned what forgiveness looks like and the process that it actually takes. So
that's amazing. And he, you almost lost him there for not long after you started that reconciliation process, right?
Yeah, man. Like my world was shaken. Again, I learned more about God in that season than ever. My dad was a couple of years after that moment that we finally kind of feel like I just got him back, as after losing him as a kid. My dad was in a car accident, and the doctors told us he had a 5% chance to live. I was married at the time, and I remember just crying my eyes out on an ICU waiting room floor, just really crying out, why, God? Like, why would you do this to me? It feels like I just got him. Why would you take him from me? And I learned more about God in that season than I ever have, really. And then I became a dad, and I actually wrote a song about it. It's on my record called Why God. And in that season, I really didn't fully understand until now, becoming a dad, what those Why God moments are all about. I felt like a bad Christian in that season. Like I couldn't possibly be a good Christian and ask this Why God question. Like it doesn't feel like there's room for it. And the people around me didn't really make room for that question either. They gave us a casserole dish, but never cried with us, or they would, say we're praying for you, but it never felt like they actually did. And I don't know. I just felt like I was supposed to mask that question. And then I became a dad with a little boy who's in the why daddy stage. And he asks me questions all the time that he never understands the answers to. But I think his hope and his joy is found in knowing that he can sit in his daddy's lap and ask me anything, and know that I will always love him, and I'll always hold him, and I'll always accept every question that he brings to me. And and I realize that so many of us don't treat God like that because we're scared that it makes us a bad Christian. But I think this makes us a kid. And if we sing this song called Good, Good Father, that probably means we're his children. And I think kids ask questions. And so I learned a lot about that season through my dad almost losing him. And after about 6 months in a coma, my dad woke up, and God did a miracle, saved his life. And I learned so much in that season about who God is and his promises to us.
That's awesome. So you talked about why God, and just, being able to ask that question, why God, and it comes from, your kids being in the why stage and all that. So I've been dying to ask you, have you ever figured out why there are so many boogers in his nose? Has he ever got that question answered?
Oh man, I just, what I've summed up is some kids have more boogers than others, and that is my kid is full of them. If we could just stop him from eating them, that would be great. That's literally become my focus in the last couple of months. Don't eat the boogers. Just stop.
One step at a time.
That's right.
So Why God, you just recently released that to radio as its own single. Yeah. Personally, that's one of my favorite songs from the album. Like I said, I'm loving, Born Again, Good Feeling is also an awesome song. They just get you moving, but
Yeah.
Just that heart cry of why God, that when the album came out, that was probably the one that I gravitated towards the most.
No, thanks, man.
So
That's definitely one of my favorites. If honestly, it is my favorite song I think I've ever written. Because it's just honest,
and it didn't need a bunch of guitars. It didn't need a bunch of production. It just, the heart and the cry from your heart is all that song really needed.
Right. Absolutely.
So you released that. What else is coming next for you? I saw that you're in the studio a little bit.
Yeah, man, in the studio, writing songs. I'm going on tour this fall with 10th Avenue North, and I'm really excited to tour with those guys. I've been a fan of them forever. And, so getting to take the stage with them and playing a lot of shows, trying to be a dad and a husband to my wife, my kids. And, I try to take it one day at a time, be inspired by what's in front of me, but God is definitely doing some cool things this year. And so, those are a couple, but I try to just focus on what's right in front of me at the moment. And today I'm at home with my kids, so I'm going to go give them some bear hugs and wrestle them and eat dinner with my fam. And those are the things I'm probably the most excited about right now.
Awesome. Well, one of the things, that I'm going to start doing here at the podcast is just giving you an open mic here. Just asking if there's anything on your heart that you want to share, whether it's, in life, in music, if there's just anything on your heart that you just want to share that's not necessarily tied to anything in particular.
Yeah, man. I would just say I guess you would say a millennial, and I'm 25 years old, but I'm in somewhat of an unusual season for a 25-year-old kid, and but I feel like the norm for millennials is to be skeptical or to fight the system or be skeptical about organizations. But if I could speak any hope to anyone that's listening to this, that's somewhat young or interested in or having these questions, I've learned more about God and more about the church when I've brought everything to Him. Those questions aren't a bad thing, but they can also drive a wall in between you and God's people. And I think we're looking at everything around us, looking for perfection, and you're not going to find it because it doesn't exist. But there is one thing and one person that is perfect, and it's the gospel and God's only Son, Jesus, who died on the cross for us. And the people around us is not our salvation. It's about putting our hope in the only perfect thing, and that is Jesus. And those why God questions, or the questions that arise about churches or organizations, they're real things from a real heart. But you need to also surround yourself by real people who don't always get it right all the time, but they're on a mission to find truth with you. And so if I could say anything, don't stop meeting at churches. Don't give up on Christian music. Don't give up on Jesus, because He'll never give up on you. And it doesn't matter if you think it's a fad. It don't matter if you think it's old-fashioned. There's something that can only give you hope that nothing and no one can take away, and that's the gospel. And it's full of a lot of broken people who need Jesus every day. And it's not supposed to be pretty. It's going to be messy, but it's going to be beautiful if you just let it happen. So that's what I would say. That's kind of something I'm passionate about recently. It's just I'm tired of people bad-mouthing the church because they think it's full of broken people. It is full of broken people. Let's accept it and just be broken people finding Jesus together every day.
Absolutely. That's so awesome. Well, we're excited for what's coming next. We're excited for the music that's coming out hopefully before too long.
Thanks, man.
Man, I hope you have better luck, with sympathy pregnancy than I've had. See, my wife is 15 weeks pregnant now, and so I'm about 15 months into the sympathy pregnant thing here. But no, we're anxiously awaiting, your little girl. Just not as much as you are, but we're we're excited. I'm excited for you for that as well. So
thank you, man. I'm excited for you too. Congrats on your pregnancy as well.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being our first artist guest here, and helping us launch this podcast.
No problem, man. Excited to do it. And I pray for the success of this podcast and then for God to use this in incredible ways, even more than you guys have ever hoped or dreamed.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy your time with your family.
Thanks, man. You have a great night.